In Chapter 11, we're going to talk about conflict management. Interpersonal conflict occurs when there's a disagreement between connected individuals. Disagreement between people who are interdependent in some way or another. It also affects each person involved. The first principle is a conflict is inevitable. At some point, there's going to be some kind of disagreement. Second principle is a conflict can center on a variety of issues. They can have to do with the relationship itself. They can have to do with issues that are outside of the relationship. Principle 3, conflict can occur in all communication forms. Doesn't necessarily have to be carried out face to face. Technology may be part of it. I'm sure people in this class have had arguments or disagreements or some kind of conflict situation that's carried out via text. Another principle is that conflict can be negative or positive. I like to state it slightly differently, that conflict can be negative and positive. So there's a downside to conflict, but there's some good things that can come out of it too. Some of the negative aspects of conflict and having disagreements, sometimes hurtful tactics could create bad feelings. Remember the principle that we talked about in the first chapter regarding the fact that communication is irreversible? Well, once you call someone a name, it's out there. They're not going to forget it. So hurtful tactics can create bad feelings that may linger and continue. Sometimes conflict also creates a closing off that can lead to deterioration of a relationship. And by closing off, we mean someone might not want to confront the differences. They might just deal with them internally, and that isn't necessarily a good thing because it doesn't come out in the open for resolution until possibly it's blown up into a huge thing. And there's also the fact that sometimes people are afraid to show that they care about something enough to bring up the differences, fear of showing weaknesses. Some of the positive aspects of conflict. To bring something out in the open really forces us to examine the problem and deal with it. It can actually make the relationship better. You let your needs and wishes be known. It can increase overall understanding between the people involved. And getting it off your chest, more or less, when it's just a small issue, is better than letting it kind of fester inside of you, and then finally you just blow up and it's a surprise to the other person. It can also, expressing a difference, expressing that you need to work on some differences of opinion or something that is bothering you, it really does indicate a commitment to the relationship and ultimately a desire to preserve the relationship, rather than just walking away and saying, oh, well, I'm just going to leave that person. So really the problems arise most often in the approach taken to conflict and how the conflict is dealt with by both parties. Conflict can be a good thing. It's how it's dealt with that determines. Of course, how it's dealt with is influenced by the culture. And also by the gender, because we know that gender is something that we become enculturated to, being male, being female. Here's an example of the way culture might influence how conflict is dealt with. Let's look at collectivist versus individualist cultures. In a collectivist culture, such as Japan, they're more apt to want to try to resolve differences with compromise. There's much more openness to give and take in general in more of a collectivist culture. On the other hand, in more of an individualist culture, there's a tendency to, hey, say, I win, you lose. Someone has to win, someone has to lose. There's a winner and a loser, and I better be the winner. So the culture can have an impact on how the disagreement is dealt with. We have to realize, too, that conflict styles have consequences. So here are the conflict styles. We'll be talking quite a bit more in class about what the consequences of each of these might be depending on the situation, because each one of these conflict styles is appropriate at some time or another. These are in no particular order, but one conflict style is what we call the competing style, and this is basically where you view the competition, you view the conflict as needing to have a winner and a loser, and you want to be the winner. It's all about me. Another way of dealing with conflict, believe it or not, is avoiding. This is sometimes the most desirable conflict style. Of course, we'll talk more about that. But the avoidance style of conflict is basically, I just want to ignore all of this. I don't even want to deal with it. Or I don't need to deal with it. Another style of conflict, dealing with conflict, is the accommodation style. Accommodating the other person. I'll give in just to end this conflict. Now these last two are interesting. The collaboration style is considered the ideal because really, in a true collaboration, both parties walk away feeling like they won. Do you think it might take a while to get to this outcome? Most certainly. There might need to be a lot of back and forth, a lot of discussion for both people to feel that they've won when it's all over. Sometimes on the way to creating a full collaboration, it's necessary to compromise. And sometimes compromise is as far as you can get with a situation. The compromising style of conflict resolution is basically a situation where each party gives up something and gets something. I won something and I lost something, and you won something and lost something. So we had to do some give and take. Sometimes that's as far as you can get. So each one of these 5 styles has a time and a place, depending on what the situation is. Here are the stages of conflict management. They talk about setting the stage. Okay, do you have time to talk about it? Is this the time to talk about it? Is this the time to confront the problem? When you've set the stage and you do have time to talk and you're both willing to deal with it, then you have to define the problem. Identify each of your goals. Identify possible choices and evaluate the choices, and then actually follow through on the selected solution. Both parties follow through on the selected solution. So those are the ideal stages of conflict management. What about context here? Do you think those contexts we studied in the first chapter have anything to do with conflict resolution? They absolutely do. I mean, look at these. These are the contexts. Physical context. Where would you rather have a disagreement with a friend? Publicly or privately? Think about that one. What are the impacts by having an argument or a disagreement in public? socio-psychological, social psychological context. This is not only the relationship between the people, but it's also, of course, the atmosphere, the mood. Is this the right atmosphere? Are we feeling up to this? Are both of us in the best mood to deal with this? Temporal, the timing. Is this the time to do it? Is this, it's 10 o'clock at night. We both had a hard day at work. We're both tired. Is this the time for me to broach this topic that's making me unhappy? Or should I wait until the weekend when we have a day when we're relaxing? That kind of thing. Finally, cultural always has a role in dealing with conflict. Some tips before the argument or the disagreement. Know what you're at odds over. It's important to agree on what you're really disagreeing on. And afterwards, if you're committed to the relationship, you might need to try affirming each other, recommitting yourself to making the relationship work. When you're in a workplace setting or a formal setting with people who aren't necessarily people that are in your family or people that you're going to have a long-term, or even if it is a situation where you have a long-term relationship with someone, you want to respect the other person, preserve the dignity of all involved. You want to be polite in listening to their side of the story with empathy. Seek as much common ground as you can. They're probably more apt to listen to you if you seek common ground. And remember that the aim of interpersonal conflict is not to win and have your opponent lose. It's really to resolve a problem and strengthen the relationship, whether it's between two people or within a group.